Victoria Strawn looked at me the way she looked at things she wanted removed. She was at the glass partition of her corner office on the 14th floor, and I was standing outside it in a gray cardigan with a pull near the left cuff, a paper coffee cup in one hand and a manila folder in the other. Patrick, her assistant, was half out of his chair before I'd finished introducing myself. I had come up from the third floor at 8:47 in the morning, 47 minutes after my shift ended. Those 47 minutes I'd spent at my desk in the overnight data entry room, where the radiator had been broken since September and the fluorescent fixture at the far end buzzed at a frequency I'd trained myself to stop hearing, working backward through my own logic until I was certain enough to move. I found a discrepancy in the Q3 reconciliation file, I said, an advisory billing line for a company called Ardent Analytics. The payment routing on their invoices traces through 3 correspondent banks to a private account in the Cayman Islands. The North Star merger documentation goes to legal at noon today. I thought someone on this floor should see it before it does. She was quiet for a moment. "You're the night shift data clerk," she said. "Marcus Cole," I said. "Yes." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. She looked at the folder, then at my cardigan, then briefly in my face with the expression of someone running a final check on a decision already made. Meridian employs 4 senior financial analysts, a compliance department, and 3 law firms whose combined billing last year exceeded $4 million, she said. If there were a problem of the kind you're describing in a merger documentation package, it would have been identified by someone within that structure. She paused. You process data entries through the overnight system. That is the complete scope of your role here. I'd suggest you go home, get some rest, and in the future limit your attention to what is actually yours to do. Gail from Investor Relations was walking past with a document binder and had slowed without appearing to. A man from the compliance team, whose name I hadn't learned, was standing near the printer and had gone still. Patrick came around from behind his desk with the apologetic deliberateness of someone who has decided not to examine what they're participating in. I placed the folder on the edge of Victoria's desk. "Keep that," I said. He picked it up without looking at me. I took the elevator to the lobby and walked out through the glass doors into November in Chicago, where the wind off the lake had the quality it gets that time of year. I sat in my car in the parking structure across the street and drank the rest of my cold coffee and thought about what had just happened and what had led to it and what would have to come next. Then I drove home. Nadia was at school. I had until 3:15. Our apartment was on the second floor of a 3-flat on West 23rd Street in Pilsen. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that got morning light when the building across the alley wasn't casting a shadow, and a living room where Nadia had claimed one corner for her chess set and her dinosaur figurines arranged along the windowsill in taxonomic order. She had been 9 since August, and had her mother's way of going very still when she was working something out, and her mother's habit of asking questions that sounded simple until you try to answer them. She had a green canvas backpack she'd had since 2nd grade with a triceratops patch on the front panel, sewn on herself with blue embroidery thread, for stitches at each corner because she'd read somewhere that was stronger than 3. Diane had died 4 years ago in March, a pulmonary embolism. She was 33 years old. She had gone into the hospital for what was supposed to be a routine procedure and was fine when I left at 7 o'clock in the evening and gone when the call came at 11:14 that night. There is a period after that which I don't revisit in sequence because sequence was not how I experienced it. I remember specific things from those months. Making Nadia's lunches, the name of her 1st grade teacher, the hallway at 2 o'clock in the morning when I walked to the kitchen for water and stood at the window because there was nothing else to do with being awake at that hour. On the wall above my desk in the bedroom, underneath the jacket I hung there every morning when I came in from shift, there was a framed certificate, darkwood frame, glass-fronted, the size of a sheet of paper. I had not taken the jacket off the frame in 14 months. I knew what the certificate said without needing to look at it. I had worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission for 11 years. The last 4 of those years, I'd been in the Enforcement Division, Chicago office, on financial fraud cases the kind that involved money moving through layered structures across multiple jurisdictions until it appeared to be something other than what it was. I worked on 3 significant cases during that period. 2 went to prosecution. The third settled. All 3 involved exactly the type of payment routing pattern I had identified in the Ardent Analytics billing line at 3:31 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, 6 weeks before I walked that folder up to the 14th floor. I left the commission 8 months after Diane died. A 5-year-old needed a parent who was present in a way the job did not allow for. That is the plain version, and it is the accurate one. The staffing agency found me the night shift data entry position at Meridian Capital 14 months later. The work required accuracy and patience and the ability to sit in a cold room for 10 hours. It paid $19.40 an hour. The rent on West 23rd Street was $1,240. The arithmetic worked if nothing broke. I found the Ardent Analytics anomaly on a Tuesday in October at 3:31 in the morning during the Q3 quarterly reconciliation file. The invoice amounts were regular and identical. $2. $3 million per quarter, 9 consecutive quarters. The service description read the same across all 9 entries: strategic advisory services, consulting, and analysis. No itemization. No deliverable references. No contact name. I pulled the vendor tax ID in the internal registry. Ardent Analytics, LLC. Registered in Delaware. No physical address beyond a registered agent's office in Wilmington. No employees in the HR system. No website that resolved. Payments processed through JP Morgan, then a London correspondent bank, then a private institution in Nassau, Bahamas. I sat with that for a long time in the cold of the 3rd floor. I went home at 8 o'clock that morning and made Nadia's lunch and walked her to school and came back and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. Not the small spiral one from work. The one with the fraying red cover I'd bought at a Walgreens years ago and used when I needed to think something through on paper. I wrote 3 columns: what the invoices claimed, what the routing structure indicated, what that structure had been used for in the cases I knew. The columns lined up in a way that made me put the pen down and look at the wall for a while. I found a second entity 3 weeks later, buried in a different account code under a separate vendor ID. Granite Peak Advisors. Same structure, same Nassau routing. $2. $6 million per quarter, 7 consecutive quarters. An additional $18. $2 million. Combined, $38. $9 million. Paid over the better part of 3 years to 2 entities that produced no documented deliverable, employed no verifiable staff, and maintained no operational presence beyond the addresses needed to receive wire transfers. I knew what I was looking at. I had spent 11 years looking at versions of it. One evening in the 4th week, Nadia came downstairs and found me at the kitchen table with a notebook open and 3 printed vendor registry pages spread in front of me. She set her stuffed triceratops on the table beside her, which was what she did when she was settling in to pay close attention to something, and looked at the pages. "What's wrong with the numbers?" she asked. I told her nothing was wrong. She looked at my face. She moved the white queen she always carried in her pocket from one hand to the other. "Okay," she said, and went to get a glass of water. I had gone up to the 14th floor because the North Star merger documentation was going to legal at noon, and because I've been building this picture for 6 weeks, and because a merger audit conducted by a firm briefed by Meridian might not pull the right account codes or chase the Nassau routing chain, might find exactly what someone wanted it to find. 200 people worked for Meridian Capital. A significant number of them had pension contributions sitting in the company's managed accounts. I picked Nadia up at 3:15. She got in the car with her green backpack and asked how my day was. "Complicated," I said. She looked out the window for a block and a half. "Did you fix the complicated part?" I thought about the folder on Victoria Strawn's desk. I thought about the photograph I'd taken of every page on my phone at 4 o'clock in the morning before printing it. I thought about what it meant that I'd been walked out of the building and the documentation had gone to legal anyway. "Not yet," I said. After dinner that evening and 2 games of chess, I put Nadia to bed and went to my desk. Under the jacket on the wall above me, the framed certificate sat in the dark. I opened the laptop. I typed a date at the top of a new document and below it a case reference number. Not Meridian's internal numbering system, but the one I had used for 11 years. Old habit, the right one for what I was doing. Then I began writing out the complete record. From the first Ardent Analytics entry to the last, from the first Granite Peak payment to the 7th, in a structured format I had used in 3 prosecutions. Sourced to specific line items. Precise about what was confirmed, what was inferred, and where the gaps remained. I worked until 2 o'clock in the morning. When I stopped, I had 17 pages. The question of who to call was not a simple one. Sandra Cho had been my supervisor for the last 4 years I was at the commission. She had been, without making a production of it, the person most responsible for my being trusted with the cases I'd worked. When I left, she had written her personal cell number on a post-it and said she understood and that the job would be there. I had transferred the number to my contacts and never used it. I looked at her name on my screen for a long time. Then I put the phone down. Sandra was the option for when I had something complete. What I had was a strong beginning. I also had 14 months of Meridian's quarterly data in my memory. I knew which account codes corresponded to which cost centers, and which of those cost centers had variance patterns that would be invisible to an outside reviewer, because those patterns only resolved into meaning when you held the full sequence in your head at once. I wrote a second document. Shorter. 5 specific data points I needed to verify through the overnight system before my access was revoked. I expected it would be revoked. I didn't know when. I set my alarm for 9 p.m. At 9:15, I was in my car driving back toward the Meridian Capital building. My access card still worked. The 3rd floor was empty at 9:30 at night, except for the hum of the server cooling system and the emergency exit signs throwing their thin red light across the rows of unoccupied workstations. I had been in this room for 14 months. I knew which desk chair rolled slightly left when you sat in it, which monitor had a pixel cluster near the lower right corner that made spreadsheet work harder in that one spot. I knew the overnight security guard's name was Owen and that he did a floor check every 90 minutes and that the elevator in the northeast corner ran quieter than the other 2. I sat down at my usual station and opened the system. The 5 data points I needed were in 3 separate account code clusters. I worked through them in order, moving efficiently but not quickly because speed in this kind of work produces errors, and errors produce doubt, and I cannot afford either. The first 2 confirmed what I already had. The Ardent Analytics routing chain was exactly as I had documented it. No deviation, no error in my earlier reading. The 3rd data point was in a subledger I had accessed once before during a routine quarterly audit entry in August. It listed internal transfers between cost centers, money moving within Meridian rather than out of it. Well, I found there had not been in my original documentation because it had not been visible from the account codes I've been working with at the time. A cost center labeled simply MC Advisory. No department name. No manager code. 12 quarterly transfers over 3 years, each moving $117,000 from Meridian's general operating account into MC Advisory, and from MC Advisory into a wire transfer queue that fed the same Nassau correspondent chain as Ardent Analytics and Granite Peak. $117,000 times 12 quarters. Another $1. $4 million. Not large by itself, but it didn't route to either of the 2 shell entities I'd already found. It routed to a 3rd one. I sat back and thought about that for a moment. It took 40 minutes to find the 3rd entity. Its vendor registration was buried under a different tax classification, listed as a professional services vendor rather than an advisory one, which placed it in a separate system table I hadn't previously examined. The entity's name was Caldwell Strategic Partners. Delaware registration. No employees. No physical address. The registered agent was the same firm used by Ardent Analytics out of the same Wilmington office. The payment routing for Caldwell Strategic Partners went through Nassau, same as the others, and then took one additional step. It went through a small private bank in Luxembourg to a trust account registered in Liechtenstein. I had the trust account number. I wrote it into the document on my phone. A trust account in Liechtenstein is not, on its own, evidence of anything. Legitimate structures exist that route through exactly this kind of arrangement. But legitimate structures don't need 3 layers of correspondent banking to get there, and legitimate vendors have employees and physical addresses and some evidence of having actually provided the service they invoiced for. I stayed in the system until 11:40 p.m. When I left, I had a complete record. 3 entities, 9 years of payment history, $40. $3 million in aggregate, routed through a chain built specifically to obscure where it ended up. On the drive home, I called no one. I drove through the empty streets of Pilsen in November with the heater running and thought about the Liechtenstein trust account number in my document and about what it would take to trace beneficial ownership from that account back to a person. The answer was that I couldn't do it. Not from a laptop in Pilsen. Not with the access I was about to lose. But Sandra Cho could. I checked on Nadia when I got home. She was asleep with her arm around the stuffed triceratops and the white queen on the nightstand beside her. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I went to my desk and added the Caldwell Strategic Partners data to the document, updated the total, and saved everything to 3 separate places. I was in bed by 1 a.m. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. At 8:14 the following morning, I received an email from Meridian Capital's Human Resources Department notifying me that my position had been eliminated as part of an operational restructuring effective immediately and that my building access had been deactivated. A severance of 2 weeks' pay would be processed by the end of the billing cycle. 2 minutes after that email arrived, my phone rang. The number was a 312 area code I didn't recognize. I answered. The man identified himself as Richard Farber, General Counsel for Meridian Capital. He was polished and unhurried, with the verbal precision of a lawyer who has spent a career saying things that cannot quite be called threats, while leaving no doubt about what is being communicated. He told me that Meridian was aware I had accessed certain internal systems outside the normal parameters of my role, and that this access, combined with the removal of proprietary data, could constitute a serious legal matter. He said he hoped I understood the complexity of my position. I asked him which specific data he was referring to. He paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to tell me he hadn't expected that to be my first question. Then he said the company's legal team was in the process of reviewing the matter and would be in contact. I said I understood and that I would be in contact as well. He hung up. I sat at my kitchen table in the November light. Nadia was at school. The apartment was quiet. The radiator in our building's wall was running fine, and I thought about how strange it was that a broken radiator 2 floors above at the Meridian building, a cold room, a reason to keep a cardigan on, small things, unrelated things, have been part of the chain of circumstances that brought me to this table with this document open on my laptop. Then I picked up my phone and called Sandra Cho. She picked up on the second ring. She said my name the way people say the names of colleagues they once trusted, without the hesitation that comes from complicated histories. I have a financial fraud case, I said. I need 15 minutes. You have them, she said, and I heard a door close. I gave her the summary in the structured format she would recognize from our 4 years of working together. The entities, the amounts, the routing chains, the timeline, the merger context. I told her about the Liechtenstein trust account and that I had the account number, but not the beneficial ownership trace. I told her about Farber's call. I told her I had a complete documentation package, 41 pages. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. You built this from data entry records? She said. The anomaly was visible to anyone reading the full sequence, I said. Nobody was reading the full sequence. A short silence. Then, send me everything. Today. Don't speak to Farber or anyone else at Meridian until you hear back from me. The North Star merger closes Friday, I said. It was Tuesday. I know, she said. Send me the file. I sent it at 10:22 in the morning. 41 pages. Every invoice, every routing chain, every account code, every comparative timeline showing the payments beginning 6 months after Meridian's internal write-off of the failed Celgene biotech acquisition. A $43 million loss that had been disclosed in internal documents but had never appeared in the shareholder-facing quarterly reports. Because the Ardent Analytics payments had offset it on the books. Because $40. $3 million going out through 3 shell companies had been recorded as advisory expenses, which reduced taxable income, rather than as losses, which would have required public disclosure. The money wasn't just leaving. It had been a mechanism that made a $43 million failure disappear from the record entirely. 200 employees and several thousand outside investors had been looking at numbers that did not reflect what had actually happened to the company. I sat with that for a while after I sent the file. At 3:15, Nadia came home and dropped her backpack by the door and looked at my face and came to sit across from me at the kitchen table without being asked. She put the white queen on the table between us. "Something happened," she said. "I lost a night shift job," I said. She was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was actually thinking, not the polite quiet of a child waiting for a cue. Was it because of the complicated numbers? "Yes," I said. She picked up the queen and turned it in her fingers. "Did you do the right thing?" I looked at my daughter in the November light coming through the kitchen window and thought about a folder on a desk and 41 pages sent to Washington and a Liechtenstein trust account number I couldn't trace on my own, and 200 people whose pension contributions were sitting in accounts managed by a company whose books didn't say what its books were supposed to say. "I think so," I said. She set the queen down in the center of the table, in the position she used when she was thinking about her next move rather than her current one. Sandra answered on the first ring at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. I had been awake since 5. She told me 3 things in the first 2 minutes. The first was that the beneficial ownership trace on the Liechtenstein trust account had come back overnight through an interagency request. The account was registered to a holding entity whose sole named officer was a woman named Claire Wren, which meant nothing until you cross-referenced the Delaware Incorporation filings, which showed that Claire Wren was the maiden name of Victoria Strawn's sister. The second thing Sandra told me was that the SEC's Enforcement Division had opened a formal investigation at 6 o'clock that morning, and that Meridian Capital had been served with a preservation notice covering all financial records going back 4 years. The third thing she told me was that she needed me in Washington by Thursday to give a formal witness statement, and that her office was arranging travel. I wrote the details in the red notebook and sat with it for a moment after she hung up. Victoria Strawn's sister. The trust account had been structured carefully enough that a standard audit would never have followed the chain far enough to find it. But the chain existed, and once you had one end of it, it was not as long as it appeared. I made Nadia's breakfast and walked her to school. She asked if I had heard back about the complicated numbers. I told her I had. She asked if it was good news. I told her it was the kind of news that was hard at first and better later, and she accepted this with the patience she brought to most things she didn't entirely understand yet. I drove to Washington on Wednesday in the used Subaru I'd bought the year before Diane died, which still had a small crack in the rear passenger window from a parking garage beam I'd misjudged in the second winter after she was gone, when I was not paying close attention to things like parking garage beams. A neighbor named Mrs. Petrusek from the first floor sat with Nadia overnight. She was 71 years old and made soup from scratch, and Nadia liked her without reservation, which was a recommendation I trusted entirely. The DOJ offices had the particular quality of federal architecture in Washington. Permanent, intentional, built to communicate that the things happening inside were meant to last. Sandra met me in the lobby. She was the same as I remembered, precise and unhurried, with the focused calm of someone who processes a great deal of information and has learned not to let any single piece of it show on her face. She shook my hand and said it was good to see me and meant both words, and we walked upstairs without ceremony. The formal statement took 4 hours. I had been in rooms like this before on the other side of the table, and I knew that the quality of a witness statement is in the specificity of what it does and does not claim. I did not speculate about intent. I described what I had found, how I had found it, what each data point confirmed, and what required further investigation to establish. At the end of it, Sandra walked me out to the hallway and told me the documentation I had provided was the most complete, unsolicited fraud referral her division had received in 6 years. I drove back to Chicago that evening. I was home before Nadia went to bed. The North Star merger was officially terminated the following morning. North Star Equity Partners issued a one-sentence public statement saying the transaction had been suspended pending review of certain financial disclosures. By noon, Meridian Capital stock had dropped 31%. By 3 p.m., 3 board members had issued individual statements distancing themselves from the senior executive team's financial reporting practices. Richard Farber resigned at 4 o'clock. Victoria Strawn released a statement through her personal attorney at 5:15. It was 4 sentences long and said nothing except that she was cooperating with all relevant regulatory inquiries and had full confidence in the integrity of her tenure at Meridian. Gail from Investor Relations called the SEC's whistleblower line that same afternoon. She had been with the company for 11 years and had been carrying something for longer than just that morning in the hallway. She was not the only one who called. I was at the kitchen table helping Nadia with a geography worksheet when the news pushed to my phone. I set it face down and helped her locate the correct rivers on the map until she was satisfied with her answers. And then I made dinner, and we ate, and she told me about a chess problem her teacher had put on the board that morning that she had solved before anyone else in the class. "How did you see it?" I asked. She shrugged with the modesty of a child who has learned that explaining how you see things is harder than just seeing them. "I looked at the parts nobody was looking at," she said. I did not say anything to that for a moment. "That's exactly right," I said. An envelope arrived at the apartment 12 days after the charges were announced. No return address, postmarked Chicago. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. The handwriting was controlled and deliberate, the kind that comes from someone who learned penmanship as a discipline rather than a convenience. It read, "Mr. Cole, I've been trying to find the right way to begin this letter for 11 days, and I have not found it, so I will begin without one. I dismissed you because of what you looked like and where you sat in that building, and I said what I said in front of people I knew were watching, and I knew what I was doing when I did it. I'm not writing to explain that or to ask you to set it aside. I am writing because you left a folder on my desk, and I put in a drawer and closed a drawer and told myself that a man in a gray cardigan running overnight data entry did not know something that 4 analysts and 3 law firms had missed. I have had a great deal of time to think about what that decision cost and who it cost, and it was not primarily you. I did not expect a reply. I wanted you to know that I understand, now, the full weight of what I chose not to see. Versus, I read it twice. I folded it and put it in the red notebook. I did not reply. She had said she didn't expect one, and she was right that one wasn't owed. But the letter was something, and I sat with it for a while before I closed the notebook and went to help Nadia with her chess. 3 weeks after I submitted the documentation to Sandra's office, the SEC announced formal charges against Victoria Strawn for securities fraud, wire fraud, and failure to disclose material financial information to shareholders. The charges were not mine to celebrate. What mattered was what they represented. 200 employees whose pension accounts had been managed against falsified books, and thousands of investors who had made decisions based on numbers that did not reflect the company's actual condition. That was what the charges were for. Not for me. Not for the cardigan or the paper cup or the way she had looked at my face in the hallway before telling me to limit my attention to what was mine to do. That same day, Gail Beaumont called me directly. She introduced herself fully, though I recognized her name immediately. She was the Gail who had slowed in the hallway on the 14th floor with the document binder. She told me she had been trying to reach me for 2 weeks. She said she had watched what happened in that hallway and had not said anything, and that she had been in a position to say something for longer than just that morning, and that she wanted me to know she understood what it had cost and what it had taken to do it anyway. I told her I appreciated her saying so. She asked if she could ask me one question. "How did you know it was there?" she said. Everyone else had access to the same system. I thought about how to answer that. About a cold room on the 3rd floor and a buzzing fluorescent fixture and a broken radiator I had stopped expecting anyone to fix. About a notebook with a fraying red cover. About 11 years of sitting in rooms where money had been moved to places it wasn't supposed to go, until the shape of that movement became as recognizable as a physical thing, something you could feel the outline of before you could name it in words. "Someone taught me where to look," I said. I was paying attention when they did. She was quiet for a moment. Then she thanked me, and the call ended. The job I found after Meridian was a consulting position with a firm that worked with mid-sized investment companies on internal compliance review. The salary was more than I had earned at the commission and more than I had earned at any point in the 14 months before it. I was working from home 3 days a week. On those days, I was at my desk when Nadia came home from school, and she would drop her backpack by the door and tell me whatever had happened, and I would close the laptop and listen because the laptop could wait and she could not wait in the same way. I did not move the apartment. The chess set was still in the corner of the living room, the dinosaur figurines still along the windowsill in taxonomic order. The radiator in our building still worked. I bought a new kitchen chair because one of the legs had been unsteady for over a year and I had been meaning to deal with it since before Diane died, and it was the right time to deal with it. I took the jacket off the frame above the desk and hung it by the door where it belonged, and left the certificate on the wall. One evening in January, Nadia stood in the doorway of my bedroom and looked at the certificate for a long time without saying anything. She was holding the white queen in one hand and the stuffed triceratops under the other arm. "Is that yours?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She studied it. "What does it mean?" I thought about a Tuesday in October at 3:31 in the morning in a cold room and a number that didn't add up. About the way certain kinds of knowledge sit in you long enough that they stop feeling like knowledge and start feeling like the way you see. "It means I did something that mattered," I said. "A long time ago, and then again recently." She thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things she intended to carry for a while. "Can you do it again?" she asked. I looked at her in the doorway with the certificate on the wall behind me and the jacket by the door and the chess set in the corner of the living room and the radiator running steadily in the wall. "Yes," I said. She nodded, satisfied, the way she nodded when an answer completed the reasoning she'd been working through. Then she went back to the living room, set up the board, and called me to come play. I went. The numbers that had been in those files did not disappear. They became part of a formal record, cited in a regulatory proceeding, entered into the public account of what had occurred at Meridian Capital between the years of the Celgene acquisition and the paused North Star merger. 200 employees received formal notice explaining what had happened with the company's financial reporting. "Then it'll be okay," she said, with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who has not yet learned to doubt that sequence. I made dinner. We played one game of chess. She won in 14 moves, which was the fastest she had ever beaten me, and she was gracious enough not to mention it. After she went to bed, I sat at my desk. I did not open the laptop. The jacket hung on the wall, and I reached up and took it off the hook and laid it on the bed behind me. For the first time in 14 months, I looked at the certificate on the wall in its dark wood frame. My name, the commission seal, the date I received it, the language of the citation below, specific and formal, naming the case and the outcome and what I had contributed to it. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put the jacket back. The room was cold, and I had a habit of covering things that didn't need to be seen until they needed to be seen. At 11:47 that night, Sandra Cho sent me a text message. It read, "Preservation order issued. North Star is paused. Call me at 7 a.m. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the desk and sat in the dark for a while. The merger was paused. Victoria Strawn didn't know yet what that meant. But in the morning she was going to find out, and the folder I had left on her desk 2 days ago was going to be the first thing anyone asked her about. I thought about the way she had looked at my cardigan, and at the paper cup in my hand, and at my face with the brief, final efficiency of someone who had already decided. I thought about the look on Gail's face in the hallway, the compliance man near the printer going still, Patrick picking up the folder without meeting my eyes. I did not feel satisfaction about any of it. I felt the particular weight of knowing that the thing I had been carrying for 6 weeks was now in other hands, and that the next part of what happened was no longer entirely mine to control. That was all right. It was how it was supposed to work. I turned off the desk light and went to check on Nadia one more time. She was asleep. The white queen was on the nightstand. The stuffed triceratops was on her pillow. I went back to my desk and sat in the dark and waited for morning. Several of them said later, in interviews with financial journalists, that they had always felt something was not quite adding up, but had not known where to look or who would listen. I knew that feeling. I had worked in rooms full of people who carried it and had learned, over time, not to trust it. The difference between them and me is small, and it is not luck. It is the difference between walking past a thing because it doesn't look at first like what it is, and stopping and looking more carefully than the situation seems to require, because someone a long time ago told you that some things, if you don't look for them, nobody will. Victoria Strawn's case moved through the regulatory process the way such cases do, slowly, with lawyers, with the measured pace of institutions built to outlast the people inside them. Her transformation, if it came, would be her own work and her own time. The letter she had written was the beginning of something, or it wasn't. That was hers to decide. What I had was enough. A kitchen table, a girl who could beat me at chess in 14 moves, and was gracious enough not to make a thing of it. A certificate on a wall I could look at without anything covering it. Work that used what I actually knew. One evening, Nadia asked me what my favorite case had been. I told her I was working on it. She gave me the look she reserved for answers that were technically true, but incomplete. "This one?" she asked. I thought about a folder placed on a desk on a November morning. A cold room. A fraying red notebook. 41 pages sent to Washington before dawn. A text at 11:47 at night that said the merger was paused. A handwritten letter folded inside the back cover of the notebook, from a woman who had finally looked at what she had chosen not to see. "This one," I said. She set the white queen in the center of the board and looked at it for a moment the way she looked at things she was about to commit to. Then she looked up at me and smiled. "Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.